The ship was dying. That was the only way to describe it. The long silver vessel that had crossed 4 star systems without a single problem was now shaking, sparking and falling apart piece by piece. The lights inside flickered like a candle in the wind. The engines made a deep, painful groaning sound that never stopped. The hull, the thick outer shell that kept everyone alive, had cracks running along it like broken glass. Commander Zale stood at the front of the ship and looked at the damage reports on the screen. Every single report was bad. The fuel cells were at 4%. The repair systems were offline. The communication towers were broken. The medical bay was flooded with coolant fluid. And the crew, what was left of them, were tired, scared, and running out of time. Zale was tall with gray skin the color of stone and 4 fingers on each hand. His eyes were large and pale yellow. He built for seeing in the dark reaches of deep space. He had been a commander for 30 years. He had never lost a ship, but right now he was very close to losing this one. The war had done this to them. The Vorkai Empire had attacked without warning 6 months ago in their time. A full fleet of Vorkai warships had come out of a fold in space and struck hard. Zale's people, the Wren, had fought back. But they were not warriors. They were builders, traders, scientists. They made beautiful things. They mapped stars. They did not make weapons. They had no idea how to fight a war. The Vorkai did. In less than 2 months, the Vorkai had taken 3 of the 5 Wren homeworlds. Billions of Wren were now living under Vorkai control, working in mines and factories, building weapons for the very enemy that had conquered them. The other 2 Wren worlds were still free, but they were under constant attack. Every day, more Wren died. Every day, the Empire got smaller. Zale's ship, the Serene, had been sent on a mission to find help. The Wren High Council had looked at every star map they had and searched for any civilization that could stand against the Vorkai. Most civilizations they found were too small, too weak, or too afraid. One planet of water-breathing creatures had refused even to speak to them. Another civilization had simply disappeared, their whole world empty and silent, as if they had never existed. Then someone on the council had pointed to a small planet near the edge of a quiet solar system, the 3rd planet from a yellow star, a world covered mostly in blue water and green land. The people there were young, very young by galactic standards. They had only just begun to leave their own atmosphere. Their technology was simple, their weapons were small. But there was something else, something that made the council pause and look more carefully. And this planet had a history unlike any other in the known galaxy. These people had been fighting wars for their entire existence, thousands of years of conflict, hundreds of different wars, big and small. They had fought with sticks and stones, then with metal blades, then with gunpowder, then with machines, then with weapons that could flatten entire cities in seconds, and through all of it, through every terrible war, they had survived. They had rebuilt. They had come back stronger every single time. The council had a word for it: resilience. The planet was called Earth. Zale had not wanted to go. He had read the reports about Earth's people. They called themselves humans. And he had felt uneasy. A species that had spent most of its history killing itself did not sound like a good ally. It sounded dangerous. It sounded unpredictable. But the council had made the decision, and Zale was a commander. He followed orders. Then the Serene had set course for Earth. The journey should have taken 3 weeks. But 6 days into the trip, a Vorkai patrol ship had found them. The battle that followed was short and brutal. The Serene was not a warship. It had no real weapons. It had only speed and a few defensive shields, and the Vorkai had torn through both like paper. Zale had lost 19 crew members in that fight. Out of a crew of 41, only 22 remained. Many of those were injured. And the ship itself was barely holding together. They had run. That was all they could do. They had pushed the broken engines as hard as they dared and jumped away from the Vorkai patrol. They had come out of the jump shaking and sparking and slowly falling apart. But they were alive, and they were close to Earth. "Commander." The voice came from a young Wren named Sovi, who was sitting at the navigation station. She had a bandage wrapped around her upper arm, and her left eye was swollen shut from the battle, but she was still working, still doing her job. "I have Earth on the sensors. We are close. Very close." Zale walked over to her station and looked at the screen. There it was, a small blue and green circle, hanging in the dark like a jewel. It was a beautiful planet. He could see the white swirls of clouds moving across the surface. He could see the deep blue of the oceans. It looked peaceful from here. "How long?" he asked. "What, at current speed, 6 hours, Sovi said. "But Commander, the hull, I don't know if it will hold for 6 hours. Zale looked at the damage readings again. She was right. The cracks were getting worse. If the hull broke open, everyone inside would die in seconds. "Increase speed," he said quietly. Sovi looked at him. "The engines are already—" "I know what the engines are doing," Zale said. "Increase speed. We have no choice." Sovi turned back to her controls and did as she was told. And the ship shook harder. The groaning from the engines got louder, but the blue and green planet on the screen got a little bigger. Zale stepped back and looked around at his crew. They were tired. They were hurt. They had lost friends and family in the fight. Some of them had not slept in days, but they were still here, still working, still breathing. He thought about what the Council had said about humans, about their strange, painful history of war and survival. And he thought about how humans had been knocked down again and again throughout their history, and had always, somehow, gotten back up. He hoped that was true. He hoped it was not just a story. Because right now, a small and battered ship full of desperate aliens was falling out of the sky toward their planet, and the Wren needed someone to get back up for them. The Serene cut through the dark, trailing smoke and sparks, heading for Earth. And the radar system at the tracking station in northern Canada picked it up first. A large object, moving fast, coming in from deep space at an angle that no natural meteor or comet would ever take. It was slowing down, not speeding up the way a falling rock would. It was being controlled, and it was leaving a trail of heat and broken material behind it like a wounded animal dragging itself home. Within 4 minutes, 6 different space agencies around the world were watching the same object on their screens. Within 10 minutes, military satellites had turned toward it. Within 20 minutes, the phones of world leaders were ringing. By the time the Serene broke through the upper layers of Earth's atmosphere, half the planet was awake and watching. The ship came down over the Pacific Ocean, moving too fast, too low. It left a long, bright streak across the night sky that people on the ground could see with their bare eyes. Some of them thought it was a meteor. Some thought it was a plane crash. A few, the ones who had always believed, knew exactly what it was. The Serene hit the water 40 miles off the coast of California. It did not crash the way a stone crashes. It skipped once, twice, then dug a long white scar across the surface of the ocean before finally coming to a stop half submerged. But steam rising off its broken hull in huge white clouds. The ship groaned one last time and then went still. Inside, Zale pulled himself off the floor. The impact had thrown everyone from their stations. Sovi was on her knees, coughing. 2 crew members near the back of the ship were unconscious. The lights had gone completely out, and the only illumination came from the emergency strips along the floor, a dim red glow that made everything look like the inside of a dying star. "High status," Zale said, his voice hoarse. "We are down," said a crew member named Bren, pulling himself upright. Bren was the ship's engineer, a short, broad Wren with hands that always smelled like engine oil. "Hull is holding. Barely. We have water coming in at the rear. Not fast, but it will become a problem. Life support? Working. For now. Zale nodded. Get everyone to the main deck. Check injuries. I want a full count. It took 15 minutes to gather the crew. 3 more people had been hurt in the landing. One of them, a young male named Tev, had a broken leg and was in a lot of pain. The medical officer, a quiet female named Doss, did what she could with what little supplies remained. 22 Wren sat in the dim red light of the damaged ship and waited. They did not wait long. Zale heard it first, a deep rhythmic sound coming from outside the ship. He had read about it before, during the mission briefing. He recognized it immediately. And helicopters. Then came the boats. He could hear engines in the water getting closer, then voices, human voices, shouting to each other from outside. He could not understand the language, but he understood the tone. It was the same in any language. It was the tone of people who were ready for trouble. They are outside, Sovi said quietly. Yes, Zale said. What do we do? Zale stood up slowly. His body ached from the crash. His head hurt. He was tired in a way that went all the way down to his bones. But he straightened his back and looked at his crew. We open the door, he said. Some of the crew looked afraid. A few exchanged glances with each other. Bren shook his head slowly, but said nothing. We came here for help, Zale continued. We cannot get help with the door closed. These people are cautious. That is normal. That is smart. We will show them that we are not a threat. We will be calm, and we will be honest. And we will ask for what we need. He walked to the main exit hatch and put his hand on the control panel. The panel flickered, then responded. The hatch made a heavy mechanical sound and swung open. Warm, salt-heavy ocean air poured into the ship. After weeks of recycled air, it smelled strange, wild and alive. Several crew members breathed it in deeply without even meaning to. Zale stepped out onto the top of the ship. The sight that met him was overwhelming. And there were military boats surrounding the Serene on all sides, big gray vessels with lights pointed at the ship. Helicopters circled overhead, their beams sweeping across the water. Further back, he could see larger ships on the horizon, moving in. On the nearest boat, dozens of soldiers in dark uniforms stood at the rail, weapons raised, pointing directly at him. Zale raised both of his hands. It was something he had learned from the mission briefing. Among humans, raising both hands meant, I am not fighting. I mean no harm. It was one of the most universal gestures on the planet. He was grateful something like that existed. For a long moment, nothing happened. The soldiers kept their weapons up. The helicopters kept circling. The lights kept shining in his face. Then one human, a tall man on the nearest boat, lowered his weapon slightly and raised a speaker device to his mouth. He spoke in a language Zale did not know, but the ship's translation system was still working. The small device in Zale's ear crackled and then gave him the words in his own language. Do not move. Identify yourself. Zale kept his hands up. He spoke slowly and clearly, letting his translation device convert his words into the man's language. My name is Commander Zale of the Wren people. We have come from another star system. Our ship is damaged and our crew is hurt. We are not here to cause harm. We are here to ask for your help. The silence that followed was very long. The soldiers did not lower their weapons. The helicopters did not fly away. But no one fired. No one moved against them. The tall man on the boat spoke again into his communicator. Not to Zale, but to someone else, somewhere else. Zale watched him and waited. Then, slowly, another boat moved closer. This one had no soldiers on the rail. Instead, a small group of people in plain clothes stood at the front, looking at him with expressions he could not fully read. Some looked afraid. Some looked curious. One, a woman with short gray hair and calm, steady eyes, was simply looking at him the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a very long time to see. She raised her own hand. Not with a weapon, just her hand. Zale looked at her, and for the first time since leaving his home system, he felt something small and fragile stir in his chest. Something that felt like hope. And her name was Dr. Elena Vasquez. She was 61 years old, had worked for a government science program for 30 years, and had spent most of her career being laughed at by her colleagues for believing that intelligent life existed somewhere out in the stars. She had written papers. She had given talks. She had sat in meeting after meeting trying to convince people to take the idea seriously. Most of the time, people had smiled politely and changed the subject. And now she was sitting across a table from a gray-skinned alien commander on a military base in Southern California, and nobody was laughing anymore. The base had been put on the highest possible alert. Armed soldiers were positioned at every door. The building where Zale and his crew were being kept was surrounded by vehicles and fences. Cameras watched every corner. The people in charge were taking no chances. But Elena had insisted on being in the room. She had argued, loudly and for a long time, that the first conversation with an alien species should not be handled by soldiers. It should be handled by a scientist, someone who could listen, someone who could think. After many hours of arguing, the people in charge had agreed, partly because nobody else wanted to sit that close to the aliens, and partly because nobody had any better ideas. She sat across the table from Zale with a notepad in front of her, even though there were recording devices covering every inch of the room. Old habits. Zale looked around at the bare walls, the cold lights, the glass panels where he could see people in the next room watching them. He looked back at Elena. He had decided, from the moment she raised her hand at him on the water, that she was the one worth talking to. He told her everything. He told her about the Wren, their history, their culture, their 5 home worlds. He told her about the Vorkai, how they had come without warning and taken everything. He told her about the war, the losses, the desperation that had sent his ship across the galaxy. He told her about the Council's decision to come to Earth, and about why they had chosen Earth specifically. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question he had been expecting. Why us? We are a small planet. We have never fought in a war beyond our own world. And what do you think we can do? Zale leaned forward slightly. Your people have been at war with each other for as long as your history has been recorded, he said. You have developed more ways to fight, more strategies, more weapons than almost any civilization we have ever found. You have been knocked down so many times, and every single time, you have rebuilt. You do not give up. That is not common. That is extraordinary. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You are asking us to go to war with an alien empire that has already beaten you. Yes, Zale said simply. Billions of lives. Yes. And if we lose? Then your planet will eventually be found anyway. The Vorkai expand. That is what they do. They take, and they move forward, and they do not stop. If they finish the Wren, they will find others. They may find you in 50 years or 500 years, but they will find you. That is not a guess. It is a pattern we have seen repeated across their history. Elena set down her pen. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, thinking. Then she looked back at him. I have to be honest with you, Commander. I am one person. I cannot make this decision. This will have to go to governments, to military leaders, to people far above my level. I understand, Zale said. But I am asking you to help carry the message. To explain it in a way that will be heard. She nodded slowly. I can try. The meetings that followed were like nothing Earth had ever experienced. Over the next 2 weeks, Zale and Elena met with leaders from dozens of countries. Some meetings were in person. Some were done through video screens. Not everyone was cooperative. Some leaders were afraid, some were suspicious. They wanted to know if this was a trick, if the Wren had enemies who were already on their way to Earth. And a few refused to meet at all. But slowly, carefully, Elena and Zale made their case. The Wren had something to offer. Their technology was, in many areas, far ahead of Earth's. Their medical science, their energy systems, their knowledge of space travel. They were willing to share all of it, freely, in exchange for help. Not just weapons, not just soldiers. Partnership. The woman with the gray hair and calm eyes turned out to be a very good speaker. She could take the fear in a room and address it directly, without dismissing it. She could take the anger, and there was a lot of anger, because many human leaders did not like the idea of being pulled into someone else's war, and redirect it toward the real problem. She was patient. She was clear. She was honest about the risks. And she kept bringing every conversation back to the same point. Whether we say yes or no today, she would say, the Vorkai will come eventually. And the only question is whether we face them standing or on our knees. Meanwhile, the Wren crew were slowly allowed more movement around the base. They were still watched constantly, but the atmosphere had changed. The soldiers who guarded them had gone from tense and suspicious to curious. A young guard named Marcus had started bringing Sovi cups of coffee every morning. She had tried it once and become completely fascinated by the drink. Bren the engineer had been allowed into a human workshop and had spent 3 straight days working alongside human mechanics, fixing parts of the Serene and, in the process, teaching the humans things about engine design they had never imagined. Small connections were forming. Thin threads of trust, still fragile but real. The Wren ship was being repaired, not just by the Wren, by humans too. By engineers who had never worked on alien technology before, but who learned fast and worked hard. The Serene was lifted out of the ocean and brought to a dry dock on the base. Day by day, it looked less like a broken wreck and more like a ship again. Zale watched the work from a distance one afternoon, standing in the pale California sunlight. He was still not used to the warmth of this planet's sun. It was a different color from his home sun, more yellow than orange, and it felt different on his skin. But it was not unpleasant. Sovi came to stand beside him, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "They work fast," she said, watching the human engineers on the scaffolding. "They do," Zale agreed. "Do you think they will say yes?" Zale was quiet for a moment, and he watched a young human woman climb high up the side of the Serene and begin welding a section of the hull with complete confidence, as if working on an alien spacecraft was something she had done every day of her life. "Yes," he said. "I think they will." The answer came on a cold Tuesday morning in December. A global broadcast carried on every major communication network on the planet. The leaders of the world's most powerful nations stood together, some in the same room, some connected by screens, and delivered the message to every human being alive. Earth would help, not just with repair and shelter, not just with food and medicine for the Wren crew. Earth would enter the fight. Human engineers, human soldiers, human scientists, and human weapons would stand alongside the Wren against the Vorkai Empire. The reaction around the world was complicated, as reactions to complicated things usually are. Some people cheered. Some people were afraid. When some were angry, not wanting to risk their lives for a war that had started in another part of the galaxy. Protests broke out in several cities. Arguments filled every news program and every dinner table, but the decision had been made, and Earth, once it made a decision, moved fast. The change that happened over the next 14 months was staggering. The Wren had been right about human ingenuity. When human engineers were given access to Wren technology, their energy systems, or their material science, their propulsion designs, they did not simply copy it. They took it apart, studied it, argued about it loudly in meeting rooms, and then began to improve it. They combined what the Wren had built with what humans already knew, and the results were things that even the Wren scientists had not thought of. The first major achievement was a new kind of hull armor. A Wren material scientist had shared a formula for a flexible metal alloy that absorbed energy instead of cracking under it. A human engineer from a steel factory in South Korea had looked at the formula and suggested a modification. A small change in the molecular structure that made the material 3 times stronger and half the weight. The Wren scientist had stared at the suggestion for a very long time and then said quietly, and that he had been working on that problem for 11 years and had never thought of that approach. The second achievement was weapons. This was the area where humans needed the least help. They had centuries of weapons development behind them, and when they combined that knowledge with Wren energy technology, the results were devastating. Pulse weapons that could disable a Vorkai ship's systems from a great distance, barrier technology that could deflect incoming fire, compact warheads that could punch through the heavy armor that Vorkai warships were famous for. A human weapons designer, looking at Vorkai ship designs that the Wren had shared, had laughed quietly to herself and said, "I see 17 weak points." The Wren battle strategist sitting next to her had said they had only ever found 3. The third and perhaps most important achievement was ships. Earth's space program had existed for decades, but it had always been small and slow, and the Wren had the knowledge to build faster, larger vessels. The humans had the industrial capacity, the factories, the materials, the workforce, to build them in enormous numbers. Together they began to assemble a fleet unlike anything that had ever existed in this part of the galaxy. Zale watched it all with a mixture of awe and something that felt uncomfortably close to guilt. He had come to Earth doubting these people. He had worried that their violent history made them untrustworthy, dangerous, too wild to work with. He had been wrong. They were not wild. They were alive in a way that his people had perhaps forgotten how to be. They argued and disagreed and made noise, but they also cared, deeply, fiercely, about getting things right. He spent a great deal of time with Elena during those 14 months. They ate meals together and talked for hours about their respective civilizations. She asked him questions about Wren philosophy, Wren art, what Wren children were like, what his own home world looked like before the Vorkai came. He told her about the vast silver forests of his home planet, where the trees had metallic leaves that rang softly in the wind like bells. He told her about the great libraries where all Wren knowledge was kept open to everyone, for free. He told her about the food, long meals shared with family, always eaten outside under the orange sky. She told him about Earth, not just the wars, though they talked about those too, honestly and without embarrassment. But the other parts, the music, the books, the strange and wonderful variety of human food, which he had been cautiously sampling and finding surprisingly enjoyable, the way humans fell in love, the way they grieved, the way a human city felt at night, all lit up with millions of small lights, every light a person or a family or a life. "Your people are extraordinary," he told her one evening, sitting outside on a bench as the sun set over the California hills. She looked at him with an expression he had come to recognize as the human version of gentle disagreement. "We are ordinary," she said. "We fight too much and think too little and make terrible decisions constantly. We are just trying to survive, same as everyone else." "That is what I mean," Zale said. She thought about that for a moment, and then she smiled. The fleet was ready in 14 months. 112 ships, a mix of rebuilt Wren vessels and new human-built craft, gathered in orbit above Earth. The ships were armed with the combined weapons knowledge of 2 civilizations. The crews were trained in tactics developed by Wren strategists and human military experts working side by side. The fleet had a name, agreed upon by both species after a long and occasionally heated discussion. They called it the Allied Reach. The night before the fleet was due to depart, Zale stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Serene and looked down at Earth below him. The planet was as beautiful from space as it had looked on his sensors when they had first approached it all those months ago. The blue oceans, the green and brown land, the slow spin of clouds. He thought about the Wren words he had said to his crew when they first saw this planet on their screens. "We have come for help." He thought about how small and desperate those words had felt at the time. He thought about what had happened since. Sylvie floated up beside him and looked at the planet, too. She was no longer wearing a bandage on her arm. She had healed well. She looked stronger than she had in months. In her hand, as always, was a mug of coffee. "Ready?" she asked. Isaiah looked at the planet for another long moment. Then he turned toward the front of the ship and the vast, dark space beyond it. "Ready?" he said. The Allied Reach moved out of orbit and pointed itself toward the stars. The first battle happened at the edge of Wren space, near a small moon called Veth. The Vorkai patrol that was stationed there had no warning. They had been watching for Wren ships, small, damaged, running away, and instead they saw something they had never seen before. A fleet of over 100 vessels moving in tight formation at a speed that their sensors could barely track. The Vorkai patrol fought back. They were experienced fighters and their ships were heavy and well armed. For the first 30 minutes, the battle was hard. 3 Allied Reach ships were hit and badly damaged. 1 human pilot, a young man from Brazil named Lieutenant Costa, guided his crippled ship into the path of a Vorkai weapon beam that would have struck the Serene and almost certainly killed everyone on board. His ship absorbed the hit. He survived, barely, and was pulled out of his cockpit 6 hours later, unconscious but breathing, by a Wren rescue crew who had never performed a human medical extraction before and were working entirely from instructions Elena had helped write 6 months earlier, just in case. But the patrol was destroyed. All of it, and in less than 2 hours. The Vorkai ships that survived tried to run and send a signal back to the main fleet. 2 of them escaped. 3 were caught before they could. "They will know we are coming now," said General Hara, the human military commander who shared operational command of the Allied Reach with Zale. She was a compact, precise woman from Japan who spoke very little but always said something worth hearing when she did speak. And she had a way of reading a battle situation that Zale found remarkable. She seemed to feel the shape of a fight the same way a sculptor felt the shape of stone. "They already suspected something was coming," Zale said. "The Wren High Council has been sending messages. The Vorkai know the remaining Wren worlds are not simply giving up." Hara nodded. "Then speed is everything. We cannot let them prepare." They moved fast. The next 6 weeks were a series of battles across the outer edge of Wren space. The Vorkai were not used to fighting an enemy that came back after being hit. They were used to breaking things and watching them stay broken. When Allied Reach ships took damage and kept fighting, when human pilots flew through weapon fire that should have ended them and came out the other side still shooting, when Wren commanders who had spent years losing started winning, the Vorkai began to make mistakes. And they became cautious where they had always been bold. They began to pull back from positions they had held for months. They called for reinforcements, pulling ships away from other parts of their empire, creating gaps that the Allied Reach quickly moved into. Elena was not on the front lines. She was back on Earth, coordinating. She was in constant communication with Zale through a Wren communication system that could carry messages across enormous distances with only a small delay. And she sent him updates, strategies discussed by human military experts on Earth, and sometimes, in the quieter moments, just messages checking that he was still alive. He always replied. The biggest battle came at Wren Prime, the largest and most important of the remaining free Wren worlds. The Vorkai had been blockading it for months, slowly squeezing it, cutting off supply lines, waiting for it to surrender or starve. When the Allied Reach came out of a spacefold directly into the middle of that blockade, the Vorkai commander had exactly 4 seconds to react before the first wave of Allied weapons hit his formation. The Battle of Ren Prime lasted 11 hours. It was the hardest fight of the campaign. The Vorkai had their most powerful ships there, deep-hulled warships the size of small cities, armed with weapons that could crack the surface of a moon. Several of those weapons were fired. 2 Allied Reach ships were destroyed completely, and everyone on board was lost. General Hera's flagship took a hit that killed 8 crew members and knocked out half her systems. She kept fighting from the auxiliary control room, calmly relaying orders while her ship burned around her. But the Vorkai, for all their power, could not handle what they were facing. The Allied Reach used the 17 weak points that the human weapons designer had identified in Vorkai's ship architecture, and they used pulse weapons to blind Vorkai sensors before closing in. They used the new hull armor that the Ren scientist and the Korean engineer had developed together so that ships that should have been destroyed absorbed the hits and kept moving. They used human fighter pilots who flew in ways that Vorkai targeting systems could not predict. Unpredictable not because of any technology, but simply because the pilots were human, and humans under pressure did things that no one expected. When the Vorkai blockade commander finally sent a surrender signal, the bridge of the Serene was very quiet for a moment. Then Bren, the engineer, who had been sitting in a corner of the bridge the entire battle, monitoring systems and muttering to himself about hull stress, looked up from his console. "Is that it?" he said. "That is the blockade," Hara's voice said through the communication system from her damaged flagship. "But not the war." She was right. And the war went on for another 8 months. There were more battles. There were losses. There were days that were very dark. But the turning point had been reached. The Vorkai had never lost a major engagement before Ren Prime. They had never seen a species they had nearly destroyed come back and fight them to a standstill. And they had certainly never faced an allied force of 2 civilizations before, one old and wise, the other young and impossible to stop. And the Vorkai were not used to humans. Nobody in the galaxy was used to humans. The peace agreement was signed in the 8th month. The Vorkai did not surrender entirely. Their empire was too large for that, but they agreed to withdraw from Ren space and to recognize the Ren worlds as sovereign. They agreed to a set of conditions that would take years to enforce, but that represented, for the first time in 3 years, the end of the killing. Zale was there when the agreement was signed. He stood in a room on the neutral station where the talks had been held, wearing his commander's uniform, and he watched the Vorkai representative press their mark onto the document. He did not feel triumphant. He felt tired. He felt the weight of everyone who had not made it to this moment. He thought about the 19 crew members he had lost in that first Vorkai attack, before they ever reached Earth. He thought about the Ren pilots lost at Ren Prime. He thought about Lieutenant Costa, who had recovered from his injuries and was back flying, and who had sent Zale a short voice message simply saying, "Still here, Commander." After the signing, he found a quiet corner of the station and sent a message to Earth. Elena received it 3 hours later, sitting at her desk in a building in California, where the lights were still on and people were still working, the way they always were. Zale's message was short. "It is done. We are coming home. I thank you for getting back up." She read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the dark California night, where millions of small lights were scattered across the hills. Every one of them a person, a family, a life going on. She picked up her pen and wrote back. "We always do.